I found out I wasn't in my grandfather's will while standing in line at the grind, waiting for a medium roast with 2 sugars. It was one of those gray October mornings where the sky looked like wet concrete and everyone moved a little slower, hunched against the cold. The coffee shop smelled like cinnamon and burnt espresso, and someone had left a newspaper open on the counter, the crossword half finished in blue ink. Kevin was ahead of me in line, fumbling with his wallet. He worked at Brennan and Associates, the law firm that handled estate planning for half of Riverside. We'd gone to high school together, though we were never close. He had that permanent look of someone who'd rather be anywhere else, shoulders slightly raised like he was always bracing for bad news. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He turned around, holding his coffee, nearly bumped into me, then did that awkward half smile people do when they recognize you but can't quite place your name. Dylan, I offered. Dylan Harper. We had chemistry together junior year. His face cleared. Right, Harper. Hey, man. He shifted his coffee to his other hand. Actually, I think I just processed some paperwork with your name on it. Estate stuff. Your grandfather, right? Vincent Harper? He said it casually, the way you might mention seeing someone's car at the grocery store. Sorry for your loss, by the way. Seems like he had everything in order, though. Your cousin Natalie was in yesterday, going over the details. I nodded, still not understanding. Yeah, Grandpa Vinny was thorough about everything. Kevin took a sip of his coffee, then winced at the heat. Big distribution from what I saw. Your Uncle Richard got the lake house, Natalie's getting the hardware stores, your Aunt Beth gets the investment accounts. Must be nice, you know? My family fights over Thanksgiving leftovers. He laughed at his own joke. I kept my face neutral, the way you do when you're trying to solve a puzzle but don't want anyone to know you're confused. Yeah, I said. Must be nice. He checked his phone, already losing interest in the conversation. Anyway, good seeing you. Tell your family congrats on everything. Then he was gone, shouldering through the door into the cold morning, leaving me standing there with the word everything echoing in my head like a coin dropped down a well. I ordered my coffee on autopilot. The barista, a college kid with pink hair and a nose ring, asked me twice if I wanted room for cream. I must have looked lost because she finally just handed me the cup and said, "Rough morning?" I walked to my car and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. The coffee burned my tongue on the first sip, but I barely noticed. Kevin had listed everything: the lake house where we spent every summer, where Grandpa Vinny taught me to fish off the dock at dawn, the hardware stores, Harper and Sons, the 3 locations he'd built from a single shop on 5th Street, the investment accounts he'd carefully managed for 40 years, the ones he always said would take care of the family long after he was gone. He'd listed everything, and my name hadn't come up once. I sat there watching the windshield fog with my breath, trying to remember if I'd missed something. A phone call, maybe, a letter that got lost in the mail. But I'd been at the funeral 3 weeks ago. I'd stood in the front row at Riverside Methodist, right between Aunt Beth and my cousin Natalie. I'd helped carry the casket. I'd shaken hands with everyone who came through the receiving line at the lake house afterward, accepting casseroles and condolences, listening to stories about Grandpa Vinny's generosity, his humor, his legendary memory for names and faces. No one had mentioned a will. No one had mentioned distributions or paperwork or Natalie going over details at a law office. No one had mentioned me being left out of the entire thing. The rest of that day moved like I was underwater. I taught 3 classes at Riverside Middle School, watched 12-year-olds paint watercolor landscapes, reminded them that there's no wrong way to see color. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. I handed out paper towels when someone spilled paint water. I stayed an hour after the final bell helping a quiet kid named Marcus finish his project for the art show, even though my hands were shaking the entire time and I kept losing track of what I was saying mid-sentence. When I got home, I pulled out the box I kept on the top shelf of my closet. Inside were things I'd saved from Grandpa Vinny over the years. Birthday cards, mostly. He sent one every year without fail, always with a $20 bill tucked inside and a note in his precise, old-fashioned handwriting. For art supplies, he'd write, or for something that makes you smile. There were postcards from the trip he took to Scotland when I was 16, photographs of the two of us at the lake house, him holding up a bass I'd caught, and both of us grinning like we'd won the lottery, a ticket stub from the minor league baseball game we went to the summer before I left for college. There was a letter, too. I unfolded it carefully. He'd written it after my parents died in the car accident when I was 19. I'd moved in with him for a year. Couldn't afford the dorm anymore, couldn't focus on classes. He'd given me the guest room overlooking the garden, and never once made me feel like a burden. The letter was short, just a few lines on his monogrammed stationery. Dylan, you have your father's heart and your mother's eye for beauty. Don't let grief convince you otherwise. The world needs what you see in it. Love, Grandpa Vinny. I read it 3 times, then put everything back in the box. I tried to think of a reason he would have left me out. Maybe I'd disappointed him somehow. Maybe I'd forgotten a birthday, missed a holiday, said something thoughtless I couldn't remember. I went through years of memories like flipping through a catalog, searching for the moment I'd failed him badly enough to be erased from his plans entirely. I couldn't find it. That night, I didn't call anyone. I didn't text Aunt Beth, Uncle Richard, Natalie. I didn't post anything on social media or send a carefully worded email asking if there had been some kind of mistake. I just sat on my couch in the dark, eating cereal straight from the box, and staring at the blank television screen. At some point, my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, my best friend from college. You good? You seemed off today. I typed back, long day, I'm fine. He responded immediately, liar, want to grab a drink? I turned my phone face down and didn't answer. I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Saying it out loud would make it real. And some part of me still hoped this was a misunderstanding, a clerical error, something that would resolve itself if I just waited long enough. By midnight, I still hadn't talked to anyone. Hadn't moved from the couch. The cereal box was empty. My phone had buzzed 4 more times. Messages I didn't read. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows in their frames. I thought about Grandpa Vinny's house on Maple Street, the Victorian with the wraparound porch and the stained-glass window in the front door. I thought about walking through those rooms as a kid, the way everything smelled like lemon polish and old books. He used to let me explore the attic on rainy days, digging through trunks of old clothes and boxes of photographs. Once, I found a medal from his time in the Navy, tucked in a cigar box with a bundle of letters. He told me stories that day about being young and scared and far from home, and how he'd promised himself if he made it back, he'd build something that lasted. He built Harper and Sons. He built a family. He built a life that mattered to people. And somehow,
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
ended up on the outside of all of it. I thought about calling Aunt Beth. She'd always been kind to me, in that distant, well-meaning way of people who care but don't quite know how to show it. After my parents died, she'd sent cards on holidays and called every few months to check in. But she was Uncle Richard's wife, and Uncle Richard had always made it clear he thought I was wasting my potential teaching art to middle schoolers when I could have gone to business school, could have worked at the hardware stores, could have done something practical. Natalie was worse. She'd been Grandpa Vinny's favorite since we were kids, or at least that's how it seemed. She was older than me by 5 years, confident and polished in a way I'd never managed. She went to law school, married a surgeon, lived in a house with a 3-car garage and professionally landscaped flower beds. At family gatherings, she'd ask about my job with this faint smile, like teaching was a hobby I'd grow out of eventually. Still shaping young minds? She'd say, and it always sounded like an insult dressed up as a compliment. I thought about the funeral, how she'd stood next to me during the service but hadn't said a word, how she'd organized the whole thing, chose the flowers, wrote the obituary, coordinated the reception. At the time, I'd been grateful. Grief had turned my brain to static, and I couldn't have managed those details if I'd tried. But now I wondered if that had been the point. If she'd taken over so completely that no one thought to ask what I wanted, what I needed, whether I should have been included in any of the decisions being made. I finally moved from the couch around 2 in the morning, went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face. In the mirror, I looked exactly like my father. Same dark hair, same narrow face, same faint scar on my left eyebrow from a childhood bike accident. People used to tell me that all the time when I was younger, and it made Grandpa Vinny smile, this sad, faraway kind of smile. "You're John's boy," he'd say, "through and through." Apparently, that hadn't been enough. I went to bed, but didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the wind and thought about all the ways I'd been stupid. Stupid for believing I mattered. Stupid for thinking the birthday cards and the fishing trips and the year I lived in his guest room had meant something permanent. Stupid for not seeing this coming. By the time the sun came up, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to ask for an explanation. I wasn't going to beg for scraps or try to convince anyone I deserved a place at the table. I was just going to leave. Not forever, just long enough to breathe. Long enough to stop feeling like I was disappearing. I called in sick to work, which I almost never did. Then I opened my laptop and searched for flights. Somewhere far. Somewhere I'd never been. Somewhere no one would think to look for me. Asheville, North Carolina kept coming up. Mountain town, artsy, full of hiking trails and small bookstores and coffee shops that aren't chains. I'd never been, didn't know anyone there. It was an 8-hour drive or a 2-hour flight. I booked a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains for 10 days, paid extra for the cancellation insurance even though I had no intention of canceling. Then I started packing. I didn't overthink it. Jeans, sweaters, my good hiking boots, a sketchbook and a box of charcoal pencils, the book I'd been meaning to read for 6 months. I moved through my apartment like I was following a script, automatic and efficient. I thought about telling Marcus where I was going, but I didn't. I thought about texting Aunt Beth, letting her know I'd be out of town, but I didn't do that either. Instead, I left a note on my kitchen counter, held down by a coffee mug. Gone for a bit. Don't worry. Then I locked the door behind me and drove away from Riverside as the sun broke through the clouds, turning the wet streets gold. The drive to Asheville took longer than I expected. I stopped twice for gas and once at a rest area somewhere in Virginia, where I sat in my car, eating a sandwich I couldn't taste, and watching trucks roll past on the highway. The landscape changed gradually as I drove south and east, the flat farmland giving way to rolling hills and then to mountains that rose up like the spine of some sleeping creature. By the time I crossed into North Carolina, the sun was setting behind the peaks, turning the sky the color of a bruise. The cabin was exactly what the photos had promised. Small, tucked into the woods at the end of a gravel road that wound up the mountainside. Cedar siding, a stone chimney, a porch with 2 rocking chairs that faced the valley below. Inside, everything was simple and clean. Wood floors, a kitchen with white subway tiles, a bedroom with a quilt that looked handmade. There was a fireplace in the living room and a stack of wood on the porch, already split and ready to go. I dropped my bag by the door and walked straight through to the back deck. The view stole whatever breath I had left. Mountains layered against mountains, fading into blue distance. The air smelled like pine and smoke. Somewhere far below, I could hear water running over rocks. No traffic sounds, no voices, just wind in the trees and the occasional call of a bird I couldn't name. I stood there until the last light bled out of the sky and the stars started to appear, more stars than I'd seen in years. Growing up in Riverside, you could see stars, but nothing like this. This was the kind of darkness that made you feel small in a way that was almost comforting, like your problems were too tiny to matter against all that infinite black.
That first night, I built a fire, even though I didn't really need one. The cabin had heat, but I wanted the sound of it, the crackle and pop of burning wood. I sat on the couch with a blanket over my legs and tried to read, but the words wouldn't stick. My mind kept circling back to the same questions. Why hadn't anyone told me about the will? Why hadn't Aunt Beth called, or Uncle Richard, or even Natalie? Surely someone could have picked up the phone. Surely someone could have said, "Listen, there's something you
Should know. But they hadn't. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. They'd decided I didn't need to know. Or worse, they'd decided I didn't deserve to know. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my messages. There were a few from Marcus, getting progressively more concerned, one from a colleague at school, asking if I was okay, nothing from my family. I opened Instagram and posted a photo I'd taken from the deck at sunset, just the mountains fading into twilight. No caption. No location tag. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I just wanted to mark the moment somehow, to prove to myself I was somewhere that wasn't Riverside, somewhere that wasn't tied to Grandpa Vinny or the will or any of it. Within minutes, the post started getting likes, a few comments from friends. Then I saw Aunt Beth had viewed it. Then Natalie. Neither of them commented, but I could feel their presence there, hovering at the edge of my escape. I turned my phone face down and added another log to the fire. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and the smell of coffee from the automatic pot I'd set the night before. I'd slept better than I had in weeks, deep and dreamless. For a moment, lying there in the unfamiliar bed, I forgot why I'd come. Then it all came rushing back, but softer somehow, like the edges had been sanded down. I spent the day hiking. There was a trail that started just past the cabin and wound up through the forest to an overlook. The climb was steep enough that I had to focus on my breathing, on the placement of my feet on the rocky path. By the time I reached the top, my legs were shaking and my shirt was damp with sweat, despite the cool air. The overlook was a flat shelf of granite that jutted out over the valley. I sat on the edge, legs dangling, and ate the apple and granola bar I'd stuffed in my jacket pocket. Below, the world looked like a watercolor painting, all soft greens and blues bleeding into each other. I could see roads threading through the valleys, tiny cars moving along them like ants. Somewhere down there, people were living their regular lives, going to work, picking up groceries, fighting over inheritance and family politics. Up here, none of that existed. I took a photo. Not of the view, but of my boots dangling over the edge, the mountains spreading out beyond. I posted it without thinking too much about it. Still no caption, still no location, just evidence that I was somewhere, doing something, existing in a space that had nothing to do with Harper family dynamics. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Marcus. "Dude, where are you?" I typed back, "Away. Needed to clear my head." "Everything okay?" I stared at the question for a long time. Then I wrote, "Getting there." He sent back a thumbs up emoji and didn't push. That was one of the things I loved about Marcus. He knew when to let silence do the work. I didn't check to see if Aunt Beth or Natalie had seen the post. I didn't want to know. That afternoon, I drove into Asheville proper. The town was everything the internet had promised. Brick buildings with murals painted on the sides, coffee shops with names like The Drowsy Poet, bookstores that smelled like old paper and possibility. I wandered through a vintage record store, flipped through albums I'd never heard of, listened to a teenager with green hair explain the difference between first pressings and reissues. I ended up at a cafe tucked into a side street, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. I ordered a coffee and a sandwich and sat by the window watching people pass. A woman with a Great Dane on a leash, a man on a skateboard who looked too old to be on a skateboard but somehow made it work. A couple arguing quietly on the corner, their body language tense, even though I couldn't hear the words. I pulled out my sketchbook and started drawing. Nothing specific at first, just lines and shapes. letting my hand move without thinking. Gradually, a face emerged. Grandpa Vinny. Not from a photograph, but from memory. The way he looked when he was concentrating on something, his reading glasses slipping down his nose, his mouth pulled into a slight frown. I added the lines around his eyes, the ones that deepened when he smiled. The scar on his chin from a fishing accident when he was young. I'd always been good at this, at catching the essential details that made a person recognizable. It was why I became an art teacher, why I loved showing kids how to really see the world instead of just looking at it. Grandpa Vinny used to say I had a gift. He'd sit for hours while I sketched him, patient and still, then study the result like it was something precious. "You've got your mother's talent," he'd say. "She could have been something special if she'd stuck with it." My mother had been an artist too, before she became a parent, before life got practical. She kept her old portfolio in the closet, and sometimes she'd pull it out and show me her work. Watercolors mostly. Landscapes and still lives that captured light in a way that seemed almost magical. After she died, I'd tried to keep the portfolio, but it disappeared somewhere in the chaos of estate sales and relatives dividing up belongings. I never found out who took it. I wondered if Grandpa Vinny had kept any of her paintings. I wondered if they'd been distributed along with everything else, divided up among people who'd never really understood what they were looking at. I finished the sketch and stared at it for a long time. Then I tore the page out of the book, folded it carefully, and tucked it into my wallet. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because it felt like keeping a piece of him that no one could take away. Maybe because I needed proof that he'd been real, that our relationship had mattered, even if his will suggested otherwise. By the time I left the cafe, the sun was low and the air had that particular sharpness that comes just before dark. I drove back to the cabin with the windows down, letting the cold air sting my face. When I got there, I built another fire and made pasta on the stove, something simple with olive oil and garlic. I ate standing up at the counter, watching the flames through the open door of the fireplace. My phone rang. Aunt Meth. I stared at her name on the screen, watching it light up and fade, light up and fade. On the fourth ring, I answered. "Dylan," she said, and her voice had that particular quality it always had when she was trying to be gentle. "Sweetheart, where are you?" "Away." "We've been worried. You didn't tell anyone you were leaving." I left a note. A pause. "Dylan, we need to talk about your grandfather." "I don't think we do." "Please don't be difficult about this. I know you must have questions." I laughed, and it came out harder than I meant it to. "Questions? Yeah, I have questions, like why I found out from Kevin at the coffee shop that everyone but me was included in the will. Like why no one thought to mention it at the funeral or any time in
3 weeks since. Another pause, longer this time. It's complicated. It really isn't. Your grandfather had his reasons. He talked to Richard and me about it before he passed. He thought it was for the best. Something hot and sharp twisted in my chest. For the best? That's what you're going with? Dylan, you have to understand. Your grandfather loved you. He did. But you chose a different path. You chose art, teaching. You didn't want anything to do with the business. Richard and Natalie, they've been involved in Harper & Sons for years. It made sense to leave it to people who would actually use it. I didn't want the business, I said quietly. I never asked for the business. But I thought I'd at least be told. I thought I'd at least matter enough for a phone call. You do matter. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? She sighed. Can you come home? Can we sit down and talk about this like adults? I am being an adult. I'm giving myself space to process the fact that my family decided I was disposable. No one thinks you're disposable. Then why does it feel that way? She didn't have an answer for that. Or if she did, she didn't share it. We sat in silence for a moment, the phone line crackling faintly between us. Where are you? She asked finally. Does it matter? Of course it matters. Your family. Funny, I said. That didn't seem to matter 3 weeks ago. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking. I set the phone on the counter and walked out onto the deck, into the cold night air. The stars were out again, that same impossible multitude. I stood there until my teeth chattered and my fingers went numb, until the anger cooled into something quieter and more permanent. When I went back inside, I saw that I had 3 new texts. One from Aunt Beth, "Please call me back." One from Uncle Richard, "We need to discuss this rationally." And one from Natalie, "Stop being dramatic and come home." I deleted all 3 without responding. That night, I posted another photo. This one was of the fire in the cabin, just the flames against the dark opening of the fireplace. Still no caption, still no explanation, just a visual diary that said, "I'm here, I'm okay, and I don't need you." Within an hour, all 3 of them had viewed it. None of them commented, none of them liked it. They just watched, and that was enough. The next few days passed in a rhythm that felt almost meditative. I'd wake with the sun, make coffee, spend the mornings hiking or exploring the town. Afternoons, I'd sit on the deck with my sketchbook, drawing whatever caught my attention. The way light fell through the trees, the texture of bark on an old oak, the curve of the mountains against the sky. I wasn't trying to make art, exactly. I was just trying to see things clearly again. Evenings, I'd cook simple meals and read by the fire. I'd brought 3 books with me, novels I'd been meaning to get to for months. I finished the first one in 2 days, something about a woman who walked across Spain and found herself in the process. It was the kind of book that would have seemed too obvious a month ago, but now it felt exactly right. I started checking my phone less. The messages kept coming. Aunt Beth called twice more. I didn't answer. Uncle Richard left a voicemail that I deleted without listening to. Natalie sent a long text that I only skimmed, something about family obligations and Grandpa Vinny's wishes and how I was making everything harder than it needed to be. Marcus was the only one I responded to, and even then only with short updates. Still in the mountains, doing okay. Thanks for checking in. He never asked for more than I was willing to give. On the 5th day, I drove to Grove Park, a famous overlook just outside Asheville. It was a clear afternoon, cold but bright, and the view from the parking area was stunning. I walked out to the edge where someone had built a low stone wall, and I stood there looking at the layers of mountains rolling away into the distance. A woman standing nearby turned to me and smiled. "First time here?" "Yeah," I said. "It never gets old. I've lived here 20 years and I still come up here when I need to think." "Does it help?" She laughed. "Sometimes. Sometimes you just need to look at something bigger than your problems, you know?" I nodded. "Yeah, I know." She went back to taking photos and I stayed at the wall, hands in my pockets, breathing in the cold air. I thought about Grandpa Vinny, about all the times he'd taken me fishing or hiking or just driving through the Oregon countryside with no particular destination in mind. He used to say that moving through landscape helped you think better, helped you see what mattered. "The world's too big to waste time on small thinking," he'd tell me. "You gotta keep your perspective." I wondered what he'd think of me now, standing on a mountain a continent away from home, avoiding my family and their phone calls. I wondered if he'd be disappointed, or maybe he'd understand. Maybe he'd done the same thing when he was young, before he built his business and his family and his carefully ordered life. I took a photo of the view and posted it. This time I added a caption, just 2 words. Finding perspective. By the time I got back to the cabin, the post had dozens of likes and comments. Friends from college, colleagues from school, people I hadn't talked to in years. Everyone saying some version of the same thing. "Beautiful. Glad you're taking time for yourself. You deserve it." Aunt Beth had viewed it but hadn't commented. Same with Natalie. Same with Uncle Richard. They were watching, but they weren't reaching out. Not really. They wanted me to come back, to fold myself back into the family structure, but they didn't want to do the work of actually bringing me back. They wanted me to be the one who gave in, who apologized for being hurt, who pretended everything was fine. I wasn't going to do that.
Everywhere had a shelf marked escape literature. The woman at the register was around my age, maybe a little older, with gray streaked through her dark hair and glasses on a beaded chain. When I brought my selections to the counter, she looked at the titles and smiled. Running away or running toward? She asked. Is there a difference? Always. She started scanning the books. Running away is about what you're leaving. Running toward is about what you're looking for. Most people think they're doing one when they're really doing the other. Which one's better? She handed me the receipt. The one that gets you where you need to be. I thought about that as I walked back to my car. Was I running away from the will? From the inheritance I'd never receive? From the family that had decided I didn't fit into their plans? Or was I running towards something else? Some version of myself that didn't need their validation? Maybe it was both. That evening, I called Marcus. Not because I needed anything, but because his was the only voice I wanted to hear that didn't come with expectations or disappointment attached. He picked up on the first ring. The Wanderer returns. Sort of, I agreed. Where are you really? Because those mountain photos are either North Carolina or you've gotten really good at Photoshop. North Carolina, Asheville. Fancy! What's in Asheville? Nothing. That's kind of the point. He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him moving around, probably cleaning his apartment or cooking dinner. Marcus was always doing two things at once. You want to talk about it? Not really. Maybe. I don't know. That's 3 different answers. I contain multitudes. He laughed. Whitman, nice. So something happened. Something bad enough that you drove 8 hours without telling anyone. I found out I'm not in my grandfather's will. The noise on his end stopped. What? Yeah, Lake House goes to Uncle Richard. Hardware stores go to Natalie. Investment accounts go to Aunt Beth. Me, I get nothing. Not even a mention. Dylan, that's... He trailed off. How did you find out? I told him about Kevin at the coffee shop, about the casual way he'd listed everything, about standing there trying to keep my face neutral while my entire understanding of my place in the family rearranged itself. And nobody told you, before the funeral, after the funeral, nothing. Nothing. That's unbelievably messed up. Yeah. Have they tried to explain? Aunt Beth called. Gave me some line about how Grandpa Vinny thought it was for the best, how I chose a different path, how Richard and Natalie are more involved in the business. I picked at the label on my water bottle. Like that makes it okay. Like choosing to be a teacher instead of working at a hardware store means I don't deserve to be part of the family anymore? Marcus swore under his breath. What are you going to do? I don't know. Right now I'm just trying to breathe. Trying to figure out if I'm hurt or angry or just tired of pretending any of this is normal. All 3. You're definitely all 3. Probably. For what it's worth, he said after a pause, your grandfather was wrong. If that's really why he did it. You're worth more than a hardware store or a lake house or whatever else he left behind. You know that, right? I felt something tighten in my throat. I'm working on knowing it. Work faster, because from where I'm sitting, you're the only one in your family who actually turned out decent. After we hung up, I sat on the deck watching the sunset behind the mountains. The sky went through its whole spectrum, gold to orange to pink to purple, each color lasting just long enough for me to think it was the most beautiful one before it shifted into something else. I posted a photo of the sunset. This time, I added a longer caption. Turns out you can drive 8 hours and still carry everything with you, but at least the view's better. Within minutes, the comments started rolling in. Friends offering support, asking if I was okay, telling me to take all the time I needed. I scrolled through them, feeling both grateful and exhausted by the attention. Then I saw that Natalie had commented. Just 3 words. So melodramatic, Dylan. I stared at those words for a long time. Melodramatic. As if being hurt by exclusion was somehow overreacting. As if expecting basic respect from your family was asking too much. I didn't respond.
I just deleted her comment and blocked her. Then I blocked Uncle Richard and Aunt Beth too. Not forever, just for now. Just until I could figure out how to exist in the same digital space as them without feeling like I was disappearing. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls, all from Riverside, all from numbers I recognized. Friends' family, distant cousins, people who'd been at the funeral. I listened to one voicemail from my second cousin, Patricia. Dylan, honey, I just heard about the will situation. I had no idea. That's just terrible. If you need anything at all, you call me, okay? Don't let them make you feel like you don't matter. You matter. Your grandfather loved you. I know he did. I deleted the rest without listening. Their sympathy felt worse than the exclusion somehow, like proof that everyone had known and no one had said anything until it became unavoidable. I spent that morning hiking a different trail, one that followed a stream up through a narrow gorge. The path was rocky and steep, and I had to use my hands in places to pull myself up over boulders. By the time I reached the waterfall at the top, I was breathing hard and my legs were trembling. The waterfall wasn't huge, maybe 20 feet, but the pool at the base was clear and deep and surrounded by moss-covered rocks. I sat on a flat stone and dangled my fingers in the water. It was shockingly cold, snowmelt probably, and it made my hand ache within seconds. I thought about a story Grandpa Vinny used to tell about his father, my great-grandfather, who'd worked in a lumber mill in Oregon back in the 30s. He'd lost 2 fingers in an accident when Grandpa Vinny was 10, and after that, he couldn't work the mill anymore. The family nearly starved that winter, but the next spring, he started a small repair shop, fixing things other people had thrown away. That shop eventually became the first Harper & Sons. He built something from nothing, Grandpa Vinny would say. That's what Harpers do. We don't quit just because the world knocks us down. I'd always taken pride in that story, in being part of that legacy. But now I wondered if legacy was just another word for obligation, for expectations you never asked for but were expected to carry anyway. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Dylan, this is Thomas Brennan. I'm the attorney handling your grandfather's estate. I need to speak with you about some matters related to the will. Please call me at your earliest convenience. I stared at the message. What could he possibly need to tell me? That I'd been left out even more thoroughly than I thought? That there was some final insult I hadn't discovered yet? I almost didn't call back, almost deleted the message and pretended I'd never seen it. But something in the wording felt different. Not apologetic exactly, but careful. Formal. I waited until I got back to the cabin, until I'd showered and made coffee and could sit somewhere comfortable. Then I dialed the number. He picked up on the second ring. Dylan, thank you for calling me back. I'm sure you're aware by now of the general distribution of your grandfather's estate. You could say that. I imagine you have questions. Not really. Seems pretty clear. He paused. May I ask where you are currently? Are you still in Riverside? No, I'm out of town. I see. This conversation would be better in person, but given the circumstances, I'll share what I can over the phone. Your grandfather left specific instructions regarding you. My stomach dropped. What kind of instructions? He indicated that you were not to be informed of the primary distribution. That was his explicit wish. However, he also left you something separate from the main estate, something he wanted you to have only after the will had been read and settled. I don't understand. There's a safe in his house, in his study. Your grandfather left instructions that you and only you are to open it. He left the combination with me, sealed in an envelope. He said you'd know what it meant. I felt dizzy suddenly. A safe? What's in it? I don't know. He never told me. He just said it was important and that you needed to understand something before you received it. He cleared his throat. The combination is your birthday, March 15th, 0315. My birthday? Yes, he was very specific about that. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Why wait until now? Those were his instructions. The will had to be read first, distributed.
He wanted you to know about everything else before you opened the safe. He said you needed context. Context. I almost laughed. Context for what? For feeling excluded and forgotten? For learning that my place in the family was negotiable? Mr. Brennan, I'm not in Riverside right now, and I'm not sure when I'll be back. I understand. But Dylan, your grandfather was very clear that this was important. Whatever is in that safe, he wanted you to have it. He wanted you to understand something. Understand what? I don't know. He never told me. He just said that when you opened it, everything would make sense. After I hung up, I sat very still for a long time. Outside, clouds were moving in, darkening the valley. The temperature was dropping. Inside the cabin, the heating system clicked on, filling the silence with a mechanical hum. A safe, with my birthday as the combination, containing something important enough that Grandpa Vinny had planned this whole elaborate reveal, had specifically instructed that I not be told about it until after I'd learned about everything else. I wanted to be angry about it, about one more manipulation, one more game, but underneath the anger was something else. Curiosity. Hope, maybe. The possibility that there was an explanation, a reason, something that would make all of this hurt less. I pulled out my phone and looked at flights back to Oregon. There was one leaving Asheville tomorrow morning, arriving in Portland by afternoon. I could rent a car, drive to Riverside, be at Grandpa Vinny's house by evening, but something stopped me. Some instinct that said I wasn't ready yet, that whatever was in that safe, I needed to be in the right headspace to receive it. And right now, I was still too raw, too angry, too hurt. I closed the flight app and opened my photos instead, scrolled back through the ones I'd taken over the past week. Mountains and trails and sunsets, the fire in the cabin, my coffee cup on the deck railing, small moments of peace I'd carved out of chaos. I posted one more photo, a shot of the stream from this morning, water flowing over rocks. No caption this time, just the image. Let them wonder. Let them watch. Let them see that I was still here, still breathing, still moving forward, even if I didn't know exactly where I was going. That night, I dreamed about Grandpa Vinny's study, the room I'd spent so many hours in as a kid, reading in the leather chair by the window while he worked at his desk. The built-in bookshelves, the smell of pipe tobacco, the old globe that sat on the corner of the desk with countries that didn't exist anymore. In the dream, I was looking for something, opening drawers, moving books, searching. Grandpa Vinny was there too, sitting in his chair, watching me with that slight smile he always had when I was trying to figure something out. "You're looking in the wrong place," he said. "Where should I look?" "Where you've always looked. Right in front of you." I felt dizzy suddenly. A safe. What's in it? I don't know. He never told me. He just said that when you opened it, everything would make sense. After I hung up, I sat very still for a long time. Outside, clouds were moving in, darkening the valley. The temperature was dropping. Inside the cabin, the heating system clicked on, filling the silence with a mechanical hum. A safe, with my birthday as the combination, containing something important enough that Grandpa Vinny had planned this whole elaborate reveal, had specifically instructed that I not be told about it until after I'd learned about everything else. I wanted to be angry about it, about one more manipulation, one more game, but underneath the anger was something else. Curiosity. Hope, maybe. The possibility that there was an explanation, a reason, something that would make all of this hurt less. I pulled out my phone and looked at flights back to Oregon. There was one leaving Asheville tomorrow morning, arriving in Portland by afternoon. I could rent a car, drive to Riverside, be at Grandpa Vinny's house by evening, but something stopped me. Some instinct that said I wasn't ready yet, that whatever was in that safe, I needed to be in the right headspace to receive it. And right now, I was still too raw, too angry, too hurt. I closed the flight app and opened my photos instead, scrolled back through the ones I'd taken over the past week. Mountains and trails and sunsets, the fire in the cabin, my coffee cup on the deck railing, small moments of peace I'd carved out of chaos. I posted one more photo, a shot of the stream from this morning, water flowing over rocks. No caption this time, just the image. Let them wonder. Let them watch. Let them see that I was still here, still breathing, still moving forward, even if I didn't know exactly where I was going. That night, I dreamed about Grandpa Vinny's study, the room I'd spent so many hours in as a kid, reading in the leather chair by the window while he worked at his desk. The built-in bookshelves, the smell of pipe tobacco, the old globe that sat on the corner of the desk with countries that didn't exist anymore. In the dream, I was looking for something, opening drawers, moving books, searching. Grandpa Vinny was there too, sitting in his chair, watching me with that slight smile he always had when I was trying to figure something out. "You're looking in the wrong place," he said. "Where should I look?" "Where you've always looked. Right in front of you." I felt dizzy suddenly. A safe. What's in it? "I don't know. He never told me. He just said that when you opened it, everything would make sense." After I hung up, I sat very still for a long time. Outside, clouds were moving in, darkening the valley. The temperature was dropping. Inside the cabin, the heating system clicked on, filling the silence with a mechanical hum. A safe, with my birthday as the combination, containing something important enough that Grandpa Vinny had planned this whole elaborate reveal, had specifically instructed that I not be told about it until after I'd learned about everything else. I wanted to be angry about it, about one more manipulation, one more game, but underneath the anger was something else. Curiosity. Hope, maybe. The possibility that there was an explanation, a reason, something that would make all of this hurt less. I pulled out my phone and looked at flights back to Oregon. There was one leaving Asheville tomorrow morning, arriving in Portland by afternoon. I could rent a car, drive to Riverside, be at Grandpa Vinny's house by evening, but something stopped me. Some instinct that said I wasn't ready yet, that whatever was in that safe, I needed to be in the right headspace to receive it. And right now, I was still too raw, too angry, too hurt. I closed the flight app and opened my photos instead, scrolled back through the ones I'd taken over the past week. Mountains and trails and sunsets, the fire in the cabin, my coffee cup on the deck railing, small moments of peace I'd carved out of chaos. I posted a photo of the stream from this morning, water flowing over rocks. No caption this time, just the image. Let them wonder. Let them watch. Let them see that I was still here, still breathing, still moving forward, even if I didn't know exactly where I was going. That night, I dreamed about Grandpa Vinny's study, the room I'd spent so many hours in as a kid, reading in the leather chair by the window while he worked at his desk, the built-in bookshelves, the smell of pipe tobacco, the old globe that sat on the corner of the desk with countries that didn't exist anymore. In the dream, I was looking for something, opening drawers, moving books, searching. Grandpa Vinny was there too, sitting in his chair, watching me with that slight smile he always had when I was trying to figure something out. "You're looking in the wrong place," he said. "Where should I look?"
Looked peaceful and organized, like someone had laid it all out with careful intention. I rented a car at the Portland airport and drove south toward Riverside. The highway was familiar in a way that made my chest ache. Every exit sign felt like a marker of my old life, the one where I'd belonged somewhere, where I'd had a place in the world that made sense. I passed the exit for the state park where we used to camp every summer, the billboard for the diner that served the best pie in 3 counties, the turnoff for the hardware store, the original Harper & Sons, the one Grandpa Vinny had built with his own hands back in the 70s. I didn't stop at any of them. I drove straight through, windows down despite the cold, letting the wind numb my face. Riverside looked exactly the same. Main Street with its brick buildings and diagonal parking, the library with the bronze statue of a logger out front, the coffee shop where Kevin had accidentally told me about the will. I drove past all of it, heading for the neighborhood where I'd grown up, where Grandpa Vinny's house still stood on the corner of Maple and 8th. The Victorian looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was still that soft yellow, the shutters still hunter green, but something about it seemed diminished. Maybe it was just that Grandpa Vinny wasn't in it anymore, wasn't sitting on the porch with his newspaper and his coffee, waiting to wave at neighbors as they passed. I parked on the street and sat on the car for a few minutes, gathering myself. The house had been left to the family collectively, according to what little I knew about the will. Nobody lived there now. Aunt Beth had mentioned something about selling it eventually, once they'd gone through everything, divided up the belongings, decided what was worth keeping and what wasn't. The key was where Grandpa Vinny always left it, under the ceramic turtle by the back door. I let myself in through the kitchen, half expecting someone to be there, to challenge my presence. But the house was silent and still. Dust motes floating in the afternoon light that came through the windows. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. The dishes and the rack by the sink, the calendar on the wall still showing August, the month he died, his reading glasses on the counter next to a folded newspaper. It was like walking into a museum of someone's life, preserved but lifeless. I moved through the room slowly, reacquainting myself with the space. The living room with its overstuffed furniture and the piano nobody played anymore. The dining room with the long table where we'd eaten every Thanksgiving and Christmas. The hallway lined with photographs, generations of Harper staring out from their frames. I found myself in front of a picture I'd seen 1,000 times, but never really looked at. My parents on their wedding day, young and bright-eyed, standing in front of the Methodist church downtown. My mother in a simple white dress, flowers in her hair. My father in a suit that was slightly too big, grinning like he couldn't believe his luck. Next to it was a photo of me and Grandpa Vinny from maybe 10 years ago. We were at the lake house, both of us holding fishing rods, both of us sunburned and happy. I remember that day. We'd caught 6 bass and thrown them all back because neither of us actually liked cleaning fish. We'd spent the afternoon on the dock talking about everything and nothing. He told me stories about my father as a kid, about the trouble they'd gotten into, about the time they'd accidentally set a small fire in the garage trying to build a rocket. Your dad was fearless, Grandpa Vinny had said. Sometimes too fearless. But he knew who he was. That's a gift, Dylan. Don't waste it trying to be somebody else. I'd thought about that conversation a lot over the years, especially when Uncle Richard would make comments about my career choices, about how I should be doing something more substantial with my life. Grandpa Vinny never said things like that. He'd always seemed proud of me. Proud that I'd found something I loved doing, even if it didn't make much money or impress anyone at family gatherings. Or, at least, I thought he was proud. The study was at the back of the house, a small room with windows overlooking the garden. The door was closed, and I hesitated before opening it, my hand on the knob. This was the moment. Whatever was behind this door, whatever was in that safe, it would either explain everything or make everything worse. I pushed the door open. The room smelled like him. Old books and wood polish, and that particular mustiness that comes from a space that's been closed up too long. His desk was still covered with papers, carefully organized in neat stacks. His reading chair sat by the window, a bookmark sticking out of the novel he'd been reading when he died. The built-in shelves were packed with books, 3 deep in places, covering every subject from naval history to gardening to philosophy. And there, behind the desk, built into the wall beneath a landscape painting of the Oregon coast, was the safe. It was smaller than I had imagined, maybe 2 feet square with a simple combination lock. I knelt in front of it,
my hands shaking slightly. The combination dial was old-fashioned, the kind you had to turn carefully, listening for clicks. I took a breath and started entering the numbers. 0, 3, 1, 5. My birthday, March 15th. The lock clicked. The handle turned. Inside the safe were 3 things. A letter, in an envelope with my name written in Grandpa Vinny's handwriting, a small leather journal, and a key, brass and old-looking, attached to a paper tag that read, First National Bank, Box 247. I sat back on my heels, staring at the contents. A letter, a journal, a bank key. This was what he wanted me to find. This was the thing that was supposed to make everything make sense. I pulled out the letter first. The envelope wasn't sealed, just tucked closed. Inside were several pages of his careful script, dated 2 months before he died. Dear Dylan, if you're reading this, then you know about the will. You know that I left the business to Natalie, the lake house to Richard, the investments to Beth, and you know that I left you nothing in the official distribution. I imagine you're hurt. I imagine you're angry. I imagine you think I didn't love you or that I valued you less than the others. Let me be clear. None of that is true. I had to stop reading for a moment, the words blurring. I wiped my eyes and continued. The truth is, Dylan, you're the only one I trust with what really matters. Richard is a good man, but he's always been too concerned with appearances, with what other people think. Beth means well, but she's never made a decision without consulting 5 other people first. And Natalie, well,
Beginning. Even as a kid, you saw things other people missed. You cared about things that didn't have dollar signs attached. When your parents died, I watched you grieve, and I watched you come back from it. And I saw someone with depth and courage that the rest of the family doesn't have. You chose to teach art to middle schoolers. Do you know how rare that is? To choose something meaningful over something profitable? To know who you are and live it out, despite everyone telling you to be something else? I left you out of the will because I wanted them to have what they think they want. The business, the property, the money. Let them fight over it. Let them manage it. Let them spend years dealing with lawyers and taxes and family politics. That's what they value. That's what makes them feel important. But you, Dylan, you get something different. You get what I actually built. Not the hardware stores or the real estate. You get the real inheritance. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. I set it down on the floor, took a breath, picked it up again. The journal in this safe contains the account numbers and details for investments I made over the past 40 years. Investments I never told anyone about. Stocks, bonds, properties in 3 different states, holdings in companies that have grown considerably since I bought into them. I've been careful, strategic, patient. The official estate, the one everyone's fighting over, is worth maybe $12 million split 4 ways. The unofficial estate, the one I'm leaving to you, is worth $78 million. Maybe more now, depending on the market. I stopped breathing, read the number again. $78 million? I know this seems insane. It is insane. But here's what you need to understand. Money isn't the point. Money is just a tool. What matters is what you do with it. Richard will use his inheritance to feel important. Natalie will use hers to build her empire. Beth will use hers to feel secure. They'll be comfortable, and that's fine. They deserve comfort. But you, Dylan, you have the chance to do something that actually matters. The journal contains not just the account details, but instructions, ideas I've had over the years about what could be done with real resources. Arts programs for schools that can't afford them,
scholarships for kids who want to study creative fields but whose families think it's impractical, grants for teachers who are trying to make a difference but are working with nothing, community spaces, public installations, programs that pay artists a living wage to create work that isn't for sale, that just exists to make the world more beautiful. I couldn't do these things myself. I was too old, too tired, too set in my ways. But you can. You have the vision, the energy, the understanding of what matters. You know what it's like to be told your passion doesn't count, that your contribution isn't valuable because it can't be measured in quarterly profits. You can make sure other people don't have to hear that. You can build something that lasts longer than hardware stores or lake houses or stock portfolios. The key in the safe is for a safety deposit box at First National. Inside are all the legal documents you'll need. Deeds, account statements, everything organized and ready. I've set it up so that the transfer is clean and simple. No one else knows about it. No one else can contest it. It's yours, free and clear. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you about this while I was alive. I'm sorry you had to feel excluded, forgotten, but I needed you to understand what the rest of them value. I needed you to see that their version of inheritance, their version of family legacy is small and temporary. What I'm giving you is the chance to build something permanent, something that reflects who you actually are. Don't tell them about this if you don't want to. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe them anything. This is your choice, your future, your legacy to build. I only ask one thing, that you do something meaningful with it, something your parents would be proud of, something that makes the world a little more beautiful, a little more kind. I love you, Dylan. I always have. I'm sorry I couldn't say it better when I was alive. I'm sorry I let you feel invisible. But I saw you. I always saw you. And I'm giving you everything that actually matters. With all my love, Grandpa Vinny. I sat on the floor of his study for a long time, the letter in my lap, tears running down my face. Outside, the sun was setting, turning the garden gold. Inside, the house was quiet, except for the sound of my breathing, the occasional creak of old wood settling. $78 million. Not because I'd earned it or deserved it, but because he'd trusted me, because he'd seen something in me that I'd spent years doubting, something the rest of the family had dismissed as impractical dreaming. I picked up the journal and opened it carefully. Inside were pages and pages of detailed notes. Account numbers, yes, but also ideas. Sketches of programs he'd imagined, lists of organizations that could use support, questions he'd written to himself about how to make the biggest impact, how to measure success in something other than dollars. On the last page, he'd written, "The best inheritance isn't what you leave behind. It's who you trust to carry it forward." I closed the journal and held it against my chest, feeling the weight of it, the responsibility. This wasn't just money. It was a mission, a purpose, a chance to prove that the path I'd chosen, the one everyone had questioned, actually led somewhere meaningful. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the empty safe, the door hanging open. Then I posted it with a caption, "Found what I was looking for. Turns out I was looking for the wrong thing all along." Within minutes, my phone started buzzing. Messages, calls, notifications piling up. I ignored all of them. Instead, I called Marcus. He answered immediately. "You're back in Riverside." "Yeah. And everything just changed." I told him everything. The letter, the journal, the $78 million hidden in plain sight while everyone else fought over real estate and hardware stores. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, just listened while I talked, my voice shaking with emotion I couldn't quite name. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he said, "Dylan, what are you going to do?" I looked around the study, at the books and the chair and the desk where Grandpa Vinny had planned all of this. "I'm going to build something that matters, something that proves he was right about me." "That's good. That's really good." "I'm terrified," I admitted. Of course you are. You just inherited a fortune and a mission. Terror seems appropriate. I almost laughed. What if I mess it up? What if I'm not the person he thought I was? Then you'll figure it out as you go. That's what you do, Dylan. You figure things out. After we hung up, I sat in the study until it was fully dark outside. Then I carefully packed
The letter, the journal, and the key into my bag. I walked through the house one more time, saying goodbye to the rooms, the memories, the version of myself that had lived here thinking I knew what family meant. On my way out, I stopped at the photo in the hallway, the one of me and Grandpa Vinny at the lake house. I touched the glass gently. "Thank you," I whispered. "I won't let you down." My phone rang as I was locking the back door. Aunt Beth. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Dylan," she said, and her voice was tight. "People are saying you were at the house. What were you doing there?" "Just visiting, saying goodbye." "You can't just go through his things without telling anyone. We're in the middle of settling the estate. There are procedures." "I didn't take anything that wasn't mine," I said, which was technically true. "That's not the point. The point is we're family and we handled these things together." "Right, together. Like how we handled the will together. Like how you all decided together not to tell me about it." She was quiet for a moment. "Dylan, I know you're upset." "I'm not upset anymore. I'm actually fine. Better than fine." "Then why did you post that cryptic photo? What were you looking for?" "Clarity," I said, and I found it. "What does that mean?" "It means I understand now. I understand what he wanted, what he valued, who he trusted. And I understand my place in all of this." "Your place is with your family." "Maybe, but not the way you think." I hung up before she could respond. Then I got in my car and drove to the First National Bank, even though it was closed. I sat in the parking lot, looking at the old brick building, thinking about what was inside that safety deposit box. Documents, account statements, the physical proof that Grandpa Vinny had seen me, had believed in me, had given me something infinitely more valuable than property or businesses. He'd given me purpose. The next morning, I was at the bank when it opened. The woman who helped me with the safety deposit box was professional and efficient, asking no questions about why a middle school art teacher was accessing a box that had been sealed for 3 months. She left me alone in the small viewing room, and I opened the metal box with hands that only shook a little. Inside was exactly what Grandpa Vinny had promised. Folders, organized by type. Real estate holdings in Colorado, Arizona, and Washington. Stock certificates. Bond documents. Account statements showing balances that made my head spin. Legal papers establishing trusts, creating structures for charitable giving, setting up foundations that existed only on paper but could be activated with a signature. There was also a smaller envelope, separate from everything else. Inside was a check, already made out to me, for $200,000. A note was paperclipped to it. "For immediate needs, so you can quit your job if you want to, so you can take time to think, so you never have to make decisions based on fear or scarcity. The rest requires planning. This is yours now." I stared at the check for a long time. $200,000 just sitting there like it was nothing. Enough to pay off my student loans, buy a house, live for years without working. Enough to do anything, be anything, go anywhere. Enough to be free. I took photos of everything, uploaded them to a secure cloud storage, then carefully packed everything back into the box. I wasn't ready to act yet. I needed time to process, to plan, to figure out what building something meaningful actually looked like. But I knew one thing for certain. I was done being invisible. Done being the one who got erased, who got overlooked, who got told their dreams were impractical. Grandpa Vinny had given me the resources to prove everyone wrong, and I was going to use them. I drove out to the lake house one more time. Uncle Richard's lake house now, officially. Though he hadn't changed anything yet. The key was still hidden in the same place, under the flower pot by the front door. I let myself in and walked through the rooms, remembering summers and holidays, and the sound of Grandpa Vinny's laugh echoing off the water. I sat on the dock, where we used to fish, and pulled out my phone. I posted one more photo, this one of the lake at sunset, the water perfectly still, reflecting the sky like a mirror. The caption read, "My grandfather taught me that the best things in life are the ones you can't inherit. You have to build them yourself. Starting today, I'm building."
That comes when something broken inside you suddenly makes sense. All those years of feeling like I'd chosen wrong, like teaching art to 12-year-olds was somehow less valuable than what everyone else was doing, all that doubt and shame and quiet resignation, it had been building up to this moment, this inheritance that wasn't about money at all. On the fourth day, I drove back to Riverside. Not to hide, not to run away, but because I needed to face what came next. I needed to see them, talk to them, tell them whatever needed to be told. I wasn't sure exactly what that would look like, but I knew I couldn't move forward while still carrying the weight of their expectations and disappointments. I called Aunt Beth first. She answered on the third ring, her voice careful and controlled. "Dylan, where are you?" "I'm in town. I'd like to talk to you. All of you. Uncle Richard, Natalie, whoever else needs to hear this." "Hear what, exactly?" "Just meet me. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, at the house on Maple Street. I'll explain everything." There was a pause, the kind where you can hear someone trying to decide how to respond. "Dylan, if this is about the will, it is, but not the way you think. We've been worried about you. The way you left, those posts from North Carolina, and then you come back and break into the house? I didn't break in. I used the key, the one Grandpa Vinny always left under the turtle." Another pause. "Fine. Tomorrow at 2. I'll make sure Richard and Natalie are there." That night, I stayed at a different hotel, closer to town. I couldn't sleep, kept rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd explain. I thought about showing them the letter, the journal, the bank documents. I thought about telling them about the $78 million and watching their faces change, watching them realize what they'd actually lost by focusing on hardware stores and lake houses. But by morning, I had decided against it. This wasn't about revenge or proving them wrong. This was about setting boundaries, about claiming my own path forward, about making it clear that I didn't need their version of family anymore because I had something better. I had purpose. I got to the house early, let myself in through the back door. The place still smelled like dust and memories. I walked through to the living room and sat in Grandpa Vinny's favorite chair, the leather one by the window where he used to read the newspaper every morning. From here, I could see the front walk, could watch them arrive. Aunt Beth came first, pulling up in her silver sedan at exactly 2 o'clock. She was nothing if not punctual. Uncle Richard arrived 3 minutes later, parking behind her, already looking annoyed about something. Natalie was last, driving up in her expensive SUV, checking her phone as she walked to the door. I met them in the entryway. Aunt Beth hugged me immediately, that tight, concerned hug that felt more like restraint than affection. Uncle Richard shook my hand with his usual firm grip, his usual measuring look. Natalie just nodded, arms crossed. "Thanks for coming." "Of course we came," Aunt Beth said. "Your family. We were worried sick." "Were you, though?" She blinked. "What kind of question is that?" "An honest one." Uncle Richard cleared his throat. "Dylan, what's this about? Beth said you had something to tell us about the will." I gestured to the living room. "Let's sit." We arranged ourselves like we were about to have a formal meeting. Aunt Beth and Uncle Richard on the couch, Natalie in the chair by the bookshelf, me standing by the fireplace, feeling like I was about to give a presentation. I know about the will. I know I wasn't included in the main distribution.
I know you all got the lake house, the business, the investment accounts. I know you decided not to tell me, that you thought it would be easier this way. Aunt Beth opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. I'm not here to argue about it. I'm not here to make you feel guilty or to ask for explanations. I actually understand now why it happened the way it did. Natalie's eyebrow went up. You do? Yeah. Grandpa Vinny wanted you to have what you value. The tangible things. The things you can manage and control and point to as proof of success. That's what makes you happy. What makes you feel secure. So he gave you that. Uncle Richard frowned. And what does that mean for you? It means I got something different. What could you have possibly gotten? Natalie said. And there was that edge in her voice, that familiar condescension. You weren't even in the will. I got clarity. I got to understand exactly where I stand, what matters to me, who I actually want to be. You can't put a price on that. Aunt Beth leaned forward. Dylan, sweetheart, I know you're trying to make peace with this, but it's okay to be hurt. It's okay to be angry. I was hurt. I was angry. I spent a week in North Carolina working through it. But I'm not anymore because I realized something important. You all keep talking about family, about legacy, about what Grandpa Vinny would have wanted. But you're talking about things, property, money, businesses. That's not what he cared about most. That's not fair, Uncle Richard said. Your grandfather built Harper and Sons from nothing. Of course it mattered to him. It did matter. But it wasn't everything. And the fact that you think it was, that's exactly why he left it to you. Natalie stood up. Okay, I've heard enough of this philosophical garbage. You're upset because you got left out, and now you're trying to turn it into some kind of moral superiority thing. It's pathetic. Is it? You got 3 hardware stores that are probably worth $4 million combined if you're lucky. You got responsibility and overhead and employees and constant maintenance. You got exactly what you always wanted. Something to manage, something to control, something to prove you're important. Her face flushed. And you got nothing. No, I got freedom. I got to walk away from all of this without any obligation to maintain his legacy or live up to his expectations. I got to find out who I am when I'm not trying to fit into this family's version of success. Uncle Richard stood too, his jaw tight. Your grandfather loved this family. He loved what we built together. You don't get to rewrite that just because you're bitter. I'm not rewriting anything. I'm just seeing it clearly for the first time. Aunt Beth was still sitting, looking between all of us with increasing distress. Please, can we not do this? Can we just talk like civilized people? We are talking. We're finally actually talking. No more pretending, no more soft words and careful explanations. You wanted me gone from the family legacy, and you got it. But you don't get to also have me pretending it didn't happen. You don't get to have me showing up to Christmas dinner acting like nothing changed. So what? Natalie said. You're cutting us off? You're going to disappear and never talk to us again? I'm setting boundaries. I'm making it clear that I don't need this anymore. Your approval, your inclusion, your version of what my life should look like, I don't need it and I don't want it. The room went quiet. Aunt Beth had tears in her eyes. Uncle Richard looked like he'd been slapped. Natalie was staring at me with something between anger and disbelief. Finally, Aunt Beth spoke, her voice small. He did love you, Dylan. Your grandfather. Whatever else happened, he loved you. Him. And I know you didn't either. But he wasn't cruel. Whatever he did with that will, with leaving you out, it wasn't because he didn't care about you. I know. Do you? Yeah. I think I understand it better than you do, actually. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been frustration. Maybe you do. You were always more like him than the rest of us. Stubborn, idealistic, willing to sacrifice practical things for principle. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he said, I know you think we don't value what you do, the teaching, the art, but that's not true. I just never understood it. Still don't, really. But I can see it matters to you. I can see it's real. Thanks, Uncle Richard. Don't thank me. Just don't disappear completely, okay? You're still family, even if you don't want to be.
I don't want to not be, I just need it to look different than it did. Fair enough. After we hung up, I sat there feeling something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not reconciliation, just a softening. A recognition that people could be limited and still be trying, could fail at love and still be attempting it. The flight to Asheville was smooth. I slept most of the way, exhausted from days of emotional upheaval. When we landed, I rented a car and drove straight to the cabin, the same one I'd stayed in before. The owner had been happy to rent it to me for a month, had even given me a discount for the extended stay. The mountains welcomed me back like old friends. The cabin smelled like pine and wood smoke, exactly as I remembered. I unpacked my bag, made coffee, and stood on the deck looking out at the valley below. This was where it would begin, where I'd turn Grandpa Minnie's journal into reality, where I'd build the foundation that would carry his vision forward, where I'd prove that inheritance wasn't about money or property or businesses. It was about trust, about being seen, about being given the tools to become who you were meant to be. I pulled out my phone and called Thomas Brennan. "Dylan," he said warmly, "I'm glad you called. I'm ready to start. I want to establish the foundation, get everything in motion. I want to make this real." "Excellent. I can have the paperwork ready within the week. Have you thought about a name?" I looked out at the mountains, at the layers of blue fading into distance. I thought about my parents, about Grandpa Vinny, about everyone who'd seen something in me before I could see it myself. "The Harper Creative Trust," I said, "for arts education, artist support, and making beauty possible." "Perfect. I'll get started immediately." After we hung up, I sat on the deck with my coffee and watched the sun move across the sky. Somewhere in Riverside, Natalie was probably at one of the hardware stores managing inventory and employees. Uncle Richard was probably at the lake house figuring out what repairs needed to be done. Aunt Beth was probably at home worrying about all of us. They had what they wanted, and now so did I. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a business plan, not yet, just a letter. To teachers who felt undervalued. To students who'd been told their creativity didn't matter. To artists struggling to make work while working 3 jobs. To everyone who'd ever been told to be practical instead of passionate. "This is for you," I wrote. "This is for everyone who chose beauty over profit, meaning over efficiency, truth over convenience. You are not impractical. You're not foolish. You're not wasting your potential. You're building something that lasts longer than quarterly earnings or real estate portfolios. You're building culture. You're building humanity. You're building what actually matters." I inherited money, but more importantly, I inherited a mission. To make sure you have what you need, to remove the barriers between you and your work, to prove that society needs what you create, even if it can't always put a price tag on it. This foundation exists because one man understood that legacy isn't about what you accumulate, it's about what you make possible for others. It exists because he trusted me to steward it wisely, and I'm trusting you to use it well. Applications will open next month. Grants for teachers, residencies for artists, program funding for schools, support for creative projects that might never turn a profit, but will absolutely enrich the world. This isn't charity. This is investment. Investment in what makes life worth living. I posted it to every platform I had. Within an hour, it had been shared hundreds of times. Within a day, thousands. Teachers reaching out, artists asking questions, administrators wanting to know more. I answered as many as I could, made lists of names and schools and programs, started building the network that would turn Grandpa Vinny's vision into reality. A week later, the foundation was official. The Harper Creative Trust, established with an initial endowment of $78 million, dedicated to supporting arts education and creative work. Thomas Brennan had worked miracles, cutting through bureaucracy and legal complexity to make it happen fast. I hired Marcus as my first employee, not because he knew anything about running a foundation, but because he understood me, understood the mission, understood what we were trying to build. Together, we started crafting grant programs, reaching out to potential partners, building the infrastructure that would support creative work for years to come. 3 months later, we awarded our first grants. $25,000 to a rural high school in Montana to restart their eliminated art program, $50,000 to a community center in Detroit to establish free workshops for neighborhood kids, $10,000 each to 15 individual artists whose work was meaningful but unmarketable, who needed time and space to create without worrying about rent. I visited every recipient, flew to Montana, drove to Detroit, met each artist in their studios or homes or wherever they worked. I wanted to see the impact firsthand, wanted to make sure the money was serving its purpose, wanted to honor Grandpa Vinny's vision by being present for what it made possible. In Montana, I watched 7th graders paint murals on the school walls, their faces bright with concentration. The art teacher, a woman named Sandra, who'd been teaching for 20 years, cried when she showed me the new supply closet, stocked with brushes and paint and canvas. She said, "You don't understand. For 5 years, I've been buying supplies out of my own pocket. For 5 years, I've been teaching kids to create with almost nothing. And now," she gestured at the closet overflowing with possibility, "now they can actually make what they imagine." In Detroit, I sat in a workshop where teenagers were learning printmaking. They were making posters about their neighborhood, about their lives, about what they wanted the world to know. One kid, maybe 15, showed me his design, a map of the city with flowers
growing through the streets. "It's about resilience," he explained, "about how beauty finds a way even in hard places." I bought the print for $500, more than it was worth by market standards, exactly what it was worth as art. The artists I visited were working on everything from experimental film to textile art to musical compositions that challenged traditional structure. None of it would ever be commercially successful. All of it was necessary. One artist, a woman creating sculptures from reclaimed materials, told me, "I was about to give up. I was about to accept that art was just a hobby, that I needed to get a real job and forget about this. Your grant didn't just give me money, it gave me permission to believe this matters." 6 months after establishing the foundation, I finally went back to Riverside, not to stay, just to visit. I drove past the house on Maple Street, past the original Harper & Sons, past all the landmarks of my childhood. Everything looked smaller, less significant, like props in a play that had already ended. I met Aunt Beth for coffee, not at the Grind, but at a new place on the edge of town, somewhere neutral. She hugged me when I arrived, held on a little too long. "You look good," she said. "Different, settled. I feel it. I've been following the foundation. What you're doing, it's remarkable. Your grandfather would be so proud. I think he already was. That's why he made it possible." She stirred her coffee, not meeting my eyes. "I owe you an apology. Several, probably. For not telling you about the will. For not standing up for you. For assuming you'd just accept being left out. You were protecting your family. I get it. You are family. I know, but I needed to not be, for a while. I needed to figure out who I was outside of all that." "And did you?" I smiled. "Yeah, I did." We talked for an hour, carefully at first, then easier. She told me about the hardware stores, about Natalie's plans to expand, about Uncle Richard selling the lake house because maintaining it was too much work, about small family dramas I no longer felt connected to. I told her about the foundation, about the grants, about the artists and teachers and students whose lives were changing because Grandpa Vinny had trusted me with his real legacy. When we said goodbye, she hugged me again. "Don't be a stranger," she said. "I won't, but I can't be who I was either. I wouldn't want you to be." I drove back through town one more time, past Grandpa Vinny's house. There was a sold sign in the yard. Someone else would live there now, fill those rooms with their own memories, their own stories. The Harper era was ending, at least in terms of property and presence. But in terms of impact, in terms of what actually mattered, it was just beginning. I posted one final photo from Riverside, the view from the park, the duck pond where I'd sat making my first plans. The caption read, "Legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you do with what you're given. Grateful for the journey, excited for what comes next." The responses were immediate and overwhelming. Students thanking me, teachers sharing stories, artists posting their work, people I'd never met saying the foundation had changed their lives, had made their dreams possible, had proven that someone out there believed creative work mattered. I read every comment, saved every message. This was the inheritance that counted, not money or property, but connection, impact. The knowledge that Grandpa Vinny's trust in me had multiplied into trust in thousands of others. I drove back to Asheville as the sun set, the mountains turning purple in the fading light. The cabin was waiting, and tomorrow there would be more grant applications to review, more artists to support, more work to do. But tonight I just sat on the deck with a glass of wine and looked at the stars. The same stars that hung over Riverside, over the lake house, over every place I'd ever been. But somehow they looked different now. Brighter, more permanent. Like they'd been there all along, just waiting for me to have the freedom to see them. 2 years had passed since I opened that safe in Grandpa Vinny's study, and the Harper Creative Trust had become something beyond what we could have imagined. We'd distributed over $12 million in grants, supported 300 artists, funded arts programs in 47 schools across 12 states. Marcus and I had built a team of 6, all people who understood that measuring success in spreadsheets missed the entire point. I was sitting in our office in Asheville, a renovated textile mill we'd converted into a workspace and gallery, when my phone rang with a number I recognized but hadn't expected to see. Natalie. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. We'd barely spoken in 2 years, just a few awkward exchanges at Aunt Beth's birthday dinner and one tense phone call about selling Grandpa Vinny's house. But something made me answer. "Dylan," she said, and her voice sounded different, smaller somehow. "I need to talk to you. Can we meet?" "What's this about?" "Please, just meet me. I'm in Asheville, actually. There's a coffee shop called The Drowsy Poet. Can you be there in an hour?" I looked at Marcus, who was reviewing grant applications at the desk across from mine. He raised his eyebrows in question. I shrugged. "Okay, 1 hour." When I arrived at the coffee shop, Natalie was already there, sitting at a corner table with an untouched latte in front of her. She looked tired in a way I'd never seen before. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, but something exhausted underneath. "Thanks for coming," she said as I sat down. "What are you doing in Asheville?" "I came to see you, to talk to you about something I should have asked about 2 years ago." She wrapped her hands around her cup, not drinking, just holding it. "I know about the other inheritance. The $78 million? The real money?" My stomach tightened. "How?" "Uncle Richard finally told me, last month. He'd known for a while, found some documents when we were clearing out the house, put the pieces together. He didn't tell me because he knew I'd lose my mind." She laughed, but it was bitter. He was right. I did lose my mind. For about 3 weeks, I was furious. At Grandpa Vinny, at you, at the entire situation. I felt betrayed all over again. I waited, saying nothing. But then I started actually looking at what you had done with it. The foundation, the grants, all those teachers and artists and students whose lives were changing because Grandpa Vinny had trusted me with his real legacy. I realized he was right about you, and he was right about me. Natalie, no, let me say this, please. I spent 2 years running those hardware stores, thinking I was honoring his legacy, thinking I was proving something. But you know what? I hate it. I hate every minute of it. The inventory, the employees, the constant maintenance, all of it. I'm good at it, but I hate it. And I realize that's exactly why he left it to me.
Because I'd do it. Because I'd stick with it even if it made me miserable, because I care more about looking successful than actually being happy. I didn't know what to say. This wasn't the Natalie I knew, the confident, sharp-edged cousin who always had everything figured out. "I came here to apologize," she continued, "for how I treated you, for calling you dramatic when you were just hurt, for assuming you were being bitter when you were actually seeing things clearly, for spending years making you feel like your choices were less valuable than mine when the truth is, you were the only one brave enough to choose what actually mattered to you." She pulled an envelope from her bag and slid it across the table. "This is my resignation from Harper & Sons. I'm selling my share to Uncle Richard. He actually wants it, actually cares about maintaining it. And I'm taking the money and I'm going to do something I should have done 20 years ago. I'm going back to school. Social work. I want to help people, real people with real problems, not manage profit margins and employee schedules." I opened the envelope, scanned the letter. It was official. Notarized. Final. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "I don't even expect you to believe that I'm serious about changing. But I wanted you to know that watching what you've built, seeing the impact you've had, it woke something up in me. Something I'd buried so deep I forgot it existed." "What's that?" The idea that life could be about more than winning, more than proving I'm the smartest person in the room, more than accumulating things that look impressive but feel empty. She wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed. I'm 43 years old, and I just figured out that my grandfather loved me enough to give me exactly what I asked for, even though it wasn't what I needed. That's a hard thing to realize. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, people walked past the window, carrying coffee and bags and all the ordinary cargo of their lives. Inside, something was shifting, some old resentment loosening its grip. The foundation has a program, I said slowly, for people transitioning into creative or service work. We provide stipends, connect people with mentors, help them build sustainable paths. You could apply. She laughed. You'd help me after everything? I'd help anyone who's trying to do meaningful work. That's the whole point. Her eyes filled with tears again. I don't deserve that. Maybe not, but Grandpa Vinny didn't give me that money because I deserved it either. He gave it to me because he trusted me to use it right. Part of using it right means not holding grudges, means recognizing when someone's ready to change. She nodded, unable to speak. We sat there for a while longer, not quite reconciled, but not enemies anymore either. Just two people trying to figure out what legacy meant, what family meant, what it looked like to honor someone by becoming who you actually were instead of who you thought you should be. When we finally said goodbye, she hugged me. A real hug, not the performative kind we'd exchanged at family gatherings for years. Thank you, she whispered, for showing me there was another way. After she left, I walked back to the office thinking about inheritance, about how it could trap you or free you, depending on what you did with it. Natalie had been trapped by her inheritance, by the expectation that she'd be grateful for hardware stores and responsibility. And I'd been freed by mine, by the trust that said I could build something meaningful. But maybe the real inheritance wasn't the money or the businesses at all. Maybe it was the choice to break the pattern, to say no to what wasn't working, to build something new even when everyone thought you were crazy for trying. Back at the office, Marcus looked up from his computer. Everything okay? Yeah, actually, yeah. I think something just healed that I didn't know was broken. Natalie? Among other things. Grinned. Good, because I've got something that's going to make your day. Remember that application from the teacher in Louisiana? The one who wanted to start a youth theater program in a town that's never had one? Yeah? We're funding it! Full amount! $50,000 over 3 years. I felt that familiar spark of joy, the one that never got old no matter how many grants we approved. Send the notification. Let's change someone's life today. That evening, I drove up to the cabin. I didn't live there full-time anymore, had bought a small house in Asheville to be closer to the office, but I still went to the cabin when I needed to think, when I needed to remember why all of this mattered. I sat on the deck with my laptop and started writing an email, not to Natalie, not to my family, but to all the grant recipients, all the artists and teachers and dreamers we'd supported over the past 2 years. I've been thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind and what we set in motion. My grandfather left me money, yes, but more importantly, he left me a question. What will you do with what you've been given? That question is now yours. You've been given resources, time, space, support. What will you do with it? What will you create that makes the world more beautiful, more just, more human? What will you set in motion that continues long after the grant money runs out? I don't need to know the answers. I just need you to keep asking the questions. Keep making work that matters, even when it's hard, even when it feels like no one's paying attention. Keep teaching kids that their creativity counts. Keep building beauty in places that desperately need it. You're not just recipients of a grant, you're partners in a vision.
A vision that says human beings need more than efficiency and profit. We need meaning. We need beauty. We need to create and imagine and express ourselves. That's not a luxury. It's essential. Thank you for doing this work. Thank you for trusting us to support it. Thank you for proving every day that my grandfather was right to believe in this. I sent the email and closed my laptop. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that no photograph could ever capture. I thought about posting a picture, about sharing this moment with the world, but decided against it. Some things were just for me. My phone buzzed. A text from Aunt Beth. I heard about your conversation. Thank you for being kind to her. You didn't have to be. I typed back. We're family. We figure it out. Her response came quickly. Your grandfather would be proud. I'm proud too. I smiled, put the phone down, and just sat with the quiet. Somewhere out there, artists were creating, teachers were inspiring, students were discovering that their voices mattered. Somewhere out there, Natalie was filling out applications for social work programs, trying to build a life that felt true instead of just successful. And here, on this mountain, I was exactly where I needed to be. Not running away
Anymore. Not running toward anything either. Just present. Just grateful. Just me. The stars came out one by one, the same stars that had watched over Grandpa Vinny, over my parents, over generations of Harpers, trying to figure out what mattered and how to build it. I whispered to those stars, to whoever might be listening, I did it. I took what you gave me and I made something good. I hope that's enough. I hope that's everything. The mountains didn't answer. The stars kept their silence. But somehow, in that quiet, I felt complete. Not because I'd proven anything or won anything or accumulated anything, but because I'd learned what Grandpa Vinny had been trying to teach me all along. Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you set in motion. It's the lives you touch, the beauty you make possible, the courage you inspire in others to choose meaning over safety. I'd inherited $78 million, but what I'd really inherited was permission. Permission to believe that what I valued actually mattered. Permission to build a life around beauty and meaning instead of profit and prestige. Permission to be exactly who I was, without apology or compromise. And now, through the foundation, I was giving that same permission to hundreds of others. That was the inheritance that would last. That was what actually mattered. I stayed at the cabin that night, slept deeply, woke to birdsong and morning light filtering through the trees, made coffee, stood on the deck, watched the world wake up around me. My phone had messages, dozens of them, responses to my email, artists sending photos of their work, teachers sharing stories about their students, people I'd never met saying thank you, saying they'd been about to give up, saying the grant had changed everything. I read every single one. Then I called Marcus. We need to expand, I said. Double the grants next year, triple them if we can. There's so much need out there, so much talent that just needs support. Let's make it happen. You sure? That's a lot of money, a lot of responsibility. I'm sure. This is what it's for. This is what he saved it for. Not to sit in accounts earning interest, but to change lives, to make things possible that weren't possible before. All right, then, let's change some lives. I hung up and stood there feeling the weight of it, the beautiful, impossible weight of having resources and responsibility and the freedom to use both in service of something meaningful. Somewhere in Riverside, Uncle Richard was probably opening the hardware store, checking inventory, managing the daily operations of a business that had been in the family for generations. That was his legacy to maintain, and he was welcome to it. Somewhere else,
Natalie was probably filling out applications, nervously hoping she wasn't too old to start over, to choose meaning over prestige. And here, in these mountains, I was building something that would outlast all of us. Something that honored where I came from while reaching toward what could be. The inheritance wasn't the money. It never was. The inheritance was the belief that I could do something meaningful with my life and the resources to make that belief real. Everything else was just details. I spent the rest of that morning at the cabin working on a new initiative that had been forming in my mind for weeks. If the foundation could support individual artists and school programs, why not create something more permanent? Something physical that could serve as a gathering place for creativity, a space where people could come together without the pressure of commerce or productivity. I sketched out ideas in my notebook. A retreat center maybe, somewhere in these mountains, studios for artists to work in residence, classrooms for workshops, a gallery space that wasn't about selling, but about sharing. A library filled with books on art and creativity and all the things that feed the soul but don't feed the bank account. The more I wrote, the more excited I became. This could be Grandpa Vinny's vision made tangible, a physical manifestation of everything he'd believed in. A place where teachers could come to recharge during summer breaks, where artists could work without distraction, where students could see that creative work was valued enough to have dedicated space, dedicated time, and dedicated resources. I called Thomas Brennan, the lawyer who'd helped establish the foundation. He picked up immediately, as he always did when I called. "Dylan, good to hear from you. How can I help?" "I want to buy property, substantial property, for a creative retreat center. Do we have the liquidity for that?" I could hear him typing, pulling up accounts. The foundation's grown considerably. Between the original endowment and the returns we've seen, yes, you absolutely have the resources. What kind of budget are we talking about? I don't know yet. I need to find the right place first, but potentially several million. Land, buildings, renovation costs, ongoing operational expenses. That's ambitious. That's the point. He laughed. Of course it is. Send me details when you have them. I'll make sure the legal structure supports it. After we hung up, I spent hours researching properties in the area. Old summer camps that had closed down, defunct retreat centers, large parcels of mountain land with existing structures. I bookmarked dozens of possibilities, made lists of pros and cons, tried to imagine which place could become what I was envisioning. By late afternoon, I'd found it. A former arts colony about 30 miles north of Asheville, closed for 5 years after the founder died and the family couldn't maintain it. 40 acres of mountain land with 8 studio cabins, a main lodge, a wraparound porch, and floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the mountains. The barn stood at the edge of a meadow, its red paint faded, but its bones still solid. The listing said it needed work, which in real estate terms usually meant it was half falling apart. I called the agent immediately, scheduled a viewing for the next day. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what the space could become, about painters working in those studios while musicians rehearsed in the barn, about teachers spending a week in the mountains creating their own art so they could return to their classrooms renewed, about students from underfunded schools getting to experience what it meant to be in a place designed entirely for creative work. The next morning, I drove to the property with Marcus. We wound up narrow mountain roads, past signs warning about falling rocks and sharp curves, until we reached a graveled driveway marked with a weathered wooden sign, Mountain Laurel Arts Colony. The place was more beautiful than the photos had suggested, even in its state of neglect. The studio cabin were scattered through the woods, connected by stone pathways overgrown with moss. The main lodge had a wraparound porch and floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the mountains. The barn stood at the edge of a meadow, its red paint faded, but its bones still solid.
Marcus whistled low. "This is perfect. This is exactly what you've been describing.
The agent met us at the main lodge, a cheerful woman named Patricia who immediately launched into the history of the place, how it had been founded in the 60s by a sculptor who wanted to create a space for artists to work away from the distractions of city life, how generations of creators had spent summers here, making work that ended up in museums and galleries around the world, how the founder's children had tried to keep it going after she died, but none of them had her vision or her energy. It needs love, Patricia said, which I was learning was real estate code for it needs a miracle. We spent 2 hours exploring every building, every inch of the property. The cabins needed new roofs and updated plumbing. The lodge needed electrical work and a complete kitchen renovation. The barn's floor was warped in places, and the pottery studio's kiln room had a leak that had damaged the ceiling. But underneath all the decay, I could see what it had been. What it could be again. I want it, I told Patricia. All of it. Make an offer. Her eyes widened. Don't you want to think about it? Bring in inspectors? Get estimates on the repair costs? I'll do all that for due diligence, but I'm buying it. This is exactly what I've been looking for. Marcus pulled me aside. Dylan, this is going to cost millions, not just to buy, but to restore and operate. I know, that's fine. This is what the money is for. This is what Grandpa Vinny meant when he wrote about creating permanent spaces for creativity. You're sure? I looked out at the mountains, at the meadow where wildflowers were starting to bloom, at the studio cabins waiting to be filled with artists again. I've never been more sure of anything. The purchase took 6 weeks to finalize. Inspections revealed even more problems than we'd anticipated, which somehow made me more determined rather than less. This place had been loved once, had served its purpose beautifully. It deserved to be loved again. We closed on the property in early May. I stood on the porch of the main lodge with the deed in my hand, looking out at 40 acres of possibility, and felt Grandpa Vinny's presence so strongly it was almost physical. This was it. This was the legacy he'd imagined, not just grants and programs, but something permanent, something that would outlast both of us. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the view from the porch, the mountains rolling away into blue distance. Posted it with a caption, "Excited to announce the newest project of the Harper Creative Trust. The Vinnie Harper Center for Creative Work will open next year, offering residencies, workshops, and space for artists and educators to create without constraint. Because everyone deserves a place where their work matters. Because beauty needs room to breathe." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Artists asking how to apply for residencies, teachers wanting to know about workshop opportunities, former students of the original arts colony sharing memories and offering to help with restoration, and buried in the comments, one from Uncle Richard. "He would have loved this, Dylan. You're doing him proud." I sat on that porch until sunset, watching the light change on the mountains, thinking about inheritance and legacy and all the ways love can manifest across time. Grandpa Vinny had given me money, yes, but more than that, he'd given me permission to dream this big, to believe that beauty and meaning mattered enough to invest everything in them. Now I was passing that permission forward, creating a space for hundreds of others could dream big too, could believe their work mattered, could make beauty without apology or compromise. The mountains watched silently, ancient and patient, as I sat there making plans for the future. Tomorrow, we'd start the real work of restoration. But tonight, I just wanted to be present in this moment, this perfect moment where everything felt possible and right and exactly as it should be. Legacy wasn't what you left behind, it was what you built that would keep growing long after you were gone. And here on this mountain, surrounded by studios waiting to be filled with artists again, and cabins waiting to welcome creators, I was building something that would last. Something that would prove over and over again that Grandpa Vinny had been right to trust me, right to see something in me that I hadn't seen in myself, right to believe that the best inheritance isn't money or property, but the courage to become who you actually are. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up.